Hello, everyone. This is Sebastian McMahon from IA Financial Group, and I'm back with another um, Economy and Finance 101 recording, this time on emerging economies and emerging markets. So, when you invest in emerging markets, where do you invest? You invest in what? Well, we'll be answering these questions right now. Okay, so before we start looking at data, maybe a few definitions. So what is an emerging country? So no one officially decides which countries are considered emerging, but typically we use the IMF, so the International Monetary Fund classification, which identifies 23 countries as being emerging instead of being developed countries. So in emerging market economies, the economy of a developing nation that is becoming more engaged with global markets as it grows. And what are the criteria to define which country is emerging and which is not? Well, it's not exactly 100% defined, but typically we use the levels of income. So income per capita typically are low. The quality of the financial system, so usually lower quality, and growth rates. So if you have a very small economy that's growing very quickly, typically these are emerging economies. So the exact list depends on who you ask. But if we start to look at some data here, so what are the main emerging countries? So there you go. You have a list here. If you look at the chart on the left, you look at the legend, you have the top 10 emerging economies. So China, Argentina, Brazil, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Poland, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, and Russia. This is the top 10. And I wanted to bring this chart here, which is the share of global GDP that is explained by all of these countries individually, just to show how it evolved through time. So most of the emerging countries have not really made any gains in their share of global GDP since the early 1980s, except for China, which used to be a very average emerging country in the 1980s, which is now explaining about the 18% of global GDP. So it's becoming a juggernaut. India is second, still growing very fast, and Russia is the third largest emerging country in the world. Now, something that I'm sure that most of you out there didn't know. For reference, on the right, the relative size of some selected countries in 2020 as a percentage of GDP, and everything there is in purchasing power parity terms. So what is that? Purchasing power parity, or PPP? This is something that we economists typically use. So what you do is that you look at the size of the GDP of a country, you correct that for the exchange rate of each of the countries, and you also look at how much it costs to buy a typical basket of goods in those countries. So you kind of readjust GDP in the purchasing power of these countries. So the sum of all of the Chinese citizens right now, if you aggregate everyone together, they can purchase something that is similar to about 18% of the global GDP. If you look on the right, the US, it's 15.8. So what that means is that when you look at everything in terms of purchasing power parity, instead of just real GDP or nominal GDP in US dollars, China is already the biggest economy in the world. So if you look at the in the chart again, the gray lines, like on the, or the tails of the chart on the right, those are the forecasts from the IMF, and it's expected that China will actually explain 20% of global GDP by 2026. So it's still growing at a very fast pace. So it is already the world's biggest economy. The EU, so European Union, is 15% of global GDP, and lowly Canada is at 1.4%. So pretty much the size of an emerging country. So China is becoming big, and maybe you'll learn something else here, that emerging countries now explain close to 60% of the global GDP of the global economy. So it's not because they're emerging economies that they're marginal economies. They're huge, and since 2007, 2008, emerging countries explain more than half of the global GDP. So they are very large players in the world, and they will be becoming more and more as we move through time. So by 2026, they should explain a total of 60% and 40% for advanced economies. So that was for the economic part. Now, if you look at emerging markets, so what is an emerging market? Of course, an emerging market is the market of a country that is considered emerging. So this is simple, but different index providers classify countries differently. So one good example is South Korea. South Korea is considered emerging by MSCI, but is considered developed by FTSE. So there are some differences like that. But if we look at the MSCI Emerging Index, which is the one that's considered more often when we look at emerging markets, well, country weights here. So we went from 2007 to 2021. So when you invest in emerging markets, where do you invest exactly? Well, in 2007, China was 16% of the index. Now it's 34.7, so 35%. So it's about double, more than double what it was 14 years ago. After that, Taiwan was 10%, now it's 15, and South Korea used to be 14, now it's 12%. So you can see when you invest in emerging markets, you're really investing in Asia, so China, Taiwan, and South Korea are the main markets that you invest in. If you look at the sector breakdown now, so when you invest in emerging markets, so in what do you get? So what sector exposure do you get? So when we think about emerging markets, many people, myself included, tend to kind of refer to the 2000s, where investing in emerging markets meant investing in energy and in commodities. So that this is what we thought. So in 2007, as you can see, the sector breakdown on the left, you had 13% technology, you had financials at 21%. 21%, we're still at about 20% for financials if you look on the right very quickly. But we had 15.4% energy in 2007, and we had 14.2% materials in 2007. So a total of about 30%. If you go back to 2021, now energy plus financials is 5.8 plus 8.5. So it's about 14%. So it cut by half. So now it's a much more diversified index, much more information technology, a lot of financials in there, consumer discretionary, which was very small in 2007, now is pretty large. So you get something that is much more broader than it was in 2007. So I hope here that you learned a thing or two about emerging markets and emerging countries. So if you want more Economy and Finance 101 material, you can go at ia.ca/economy, click on the Economy and Finance 101 tile that you have here. You'll find more material there. If you like what you see, you can follow me on the Twitter and connect on LinkedIn. So it'll be my pleasure to give you more information all through the year in these two places. So thank you, and I'll see you again next time in the next Economy and Finance 101 video.